Dr. Ellen Hendriksen, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be back.
Excited to have you back. All right, so tell me how this latest book came about, because the last time you were on the show, we were talking about social anxiety. This book is related, but quite distinct, related in some ways to anxiety, but quite distinct from social anxiety. But I suspect this, and I'd love to hear this story if you're comfortable telling it. I suspect this book has its roots in your own struggles with perfectionism.
How did you guess? Yes, I write about my own problems. Oh, yeah. Well, and there are enough people out there, I've realized, with the exact same problems that it forms an audience and therefore a community. So yeah, for sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, social anxiety and perfectionism are at the very least siblings, or to change the metaphor, if we drill down on social anxiety, we find a foundation of perfectionism because they're both based on the same flawed perception of self, the felt sense of inadequacy that keeps us separated from others. And in both, we have to work, or we think, we have to work hard to avoid finding ourselves in a situation that would reveal that inadequacy to others. So we need to either hide or avoid or overcompensate. But regardless of whether it's social anxiety, perfectionism, that hiding and concealing and overcompensating backfires because it's that steals the credit for keeping us safe. And in both, we think we have to perform as superbly as possible for people to like us. So that's the connection. And then you asked, personally about perfectionism, and yeah, for sure. So let me back up and give a definition of perfectionism. I find it highly ironic that perfectionism researchers can't agree on a perfect definition of perfectionism. And so the one that I like is that it's demanding of ourselves a level of performance higher than is required for the situation. And I like that because you can look at it two ways. You can look at it as that's quite healthy. Please keep doing that. Shoot for the stars, do more than the bare minimum. Research shows that setting goals and striving to achieve them confers all sorts of cool things like mastery and purpose. So go ahead, please demand of yourself a level of performance higher than what is required for the situation. However, where it tips over into less healthy mindsets and behaviors is when we start to equate our performance with our character. We look to answer that universal, very human question of am I okay? Am I good enough? By looking at how well we do things, looking at our performance. And so for me, for too much of my life, I held that, the classic mindset of making my self-evaluation, my self-worth overly dependent on meeting the personally demanding standards that I set for myself. So I don't know, high school and college probably put too much stock in grades. When I was a young adult and, social life is very important, I probably put too much stock in social behavior. When I was launching my career and a young mom, the measure was productivity. And so not only was I conflating what I did with who I was, but I also did three things that made my life harder. And the specifics gets into the universal, because this is what we all do when we start to conflate, who we are with our performance. One is that I would focus on flaws and details. So, for example, in my social behavior era, if there was an awkward silence on a date, or I told a joke that no one seemed to get, even if everything else went well, that detail is what I would think about afterwards. I would do the equivalent of focusing on the one frowning face in the crowd of smiles. 2, I would give myself only 2 options, all or nothing, for evaluating outcomes. So let's look at grades. If I was aiming for straight A's and I got that, except for 189, that disqualified all the other A's and shunted me from all to nothing. So I gave myself this very narrow criteria for success and a very wide gulf for, if we're defining failure as not meeting expectations, for failure. When I was looking at productivity too closely, if there were a couple of things on the to-do list that went undone, that wasn't good enough. And then the third thing I did is that I was hard on myself. And so when we fall short of our personally demanding standards, we will often self-criticize. But, and this is, I find ironic, if we somehow pull out all the stops and meet our personally demanding standards, we decide those standards were insufficiently demanding in the first place and move the goalposts. So anyway, that's me. So I wrote this book for myself, but I also wrote it for everyone else. I think there's a silent epidemic of perfectionism happening. And as a clinical psychologist at an anxiety specialty center, the vast majority of my clients have perfectionism at the center of their challenges. But no one has ever come in and said, Ellen, I'm a perfectionist. I need help with perfectionism. Like that. No one ever says that. What they say is things like, I feel like I'm failing, or I feel like I'm falling behind. I'm not reaching my potential. I have so many things on my plate and I'm not doing any of them well. We all say things like that. And I think that's because perfectionism is a little bit of a misnomer. It's really not about striving to be perfect. It's about never feeling good enough. And that's something that a lot of us can relate to, especially in 2025.
Well, let's just pause on that for a second. It's a sorry to be, I hate when people do this to me, but I'm going to ask you to say that again, because I think it's worth dwelling on. Perfectionism as a word is a bit of a misnomer when applied to the actual condition.
Yes, because the mindset, through my own experience and observing that of clients and the research, shows that it is less about striving to be perfect and more about never feeling good enough. We think we have to perform as superbly as possible to be sufficient as a person.
So it's not actually about nailing it. It may manifest as a desire for the perfect outcome of whatever you're doing, but the underlying issue is not enoughness.
Correct. Yes. And I think we often think about perfectionism as like a personality profile, like sort of type A, picky, detail oriented. And it can be that, but again, that heart of it is conflating our self-evaluation with our performance. And it can be about anything. Like I talked about grades and social behavior and productivity, but it could be our work evaluation, our weight, our bank account, our last musical or athletic performance, or even more subtle things like, did I stick to healthy eating today? Was I a good parent today? Did I meditate? Did I do it well enough? Did I get distracted? It's anything where, again, we think we have to perform as superbly as possible to be sufficient, to be enough.
16 years of meditation, and you're describing my inner dialogue to this day. Although I will say that I catch myself much more rapidly, and I'm much more kind to myself in a million different ways. But the conditioning remains because it is so deeply ingrained culturally and historically. So, of course, the question that comes screaming out of this conversation is, well, how do we address that insufficiency? And we will get to that. But I do want to stay on perfectionism for a second, and specifically on your perfectionism, because if memory serves, it manifested physically for you?
Yeah. Wow. You read the book. So, yes. For me. Okay. So when I was researching this book, I came across a paper, and I'm going to mangle this title, but it was, to paraphrase, it was something like Perfectionist at 20, like work-life balance issues at 40. And I was like, oh, have these people been in my house? What is this? So, yes, no, for me, I think I had been grinding for so long, basically, that, which, and this is a tangent, sorry, that you use the word culture, that our culture rewards, right? Like in an ever more competitive, like ratings-oriented, optimization-focused culture, like it makes sense that we respond by feeling like we're never doing enough, like aren't good enough. Anyway, okay. So I had been grinding for a long time, and around 40, it really started to manifest in my body. And I went through like a number of rounds of physical therapy. I woke up one morning, I couldn't turn my head to the right because my muscles were too tight. I had blown out my forearm from typing too much. I got a GI illness. So yeah, it absolutely manifested physically. And I mean, I'd already kind of known this wasn't sustainable, but that really, drove that message home that something needed to change.
The perfectionist in me, although maybe this isn't perfectionism, maybe this is just honesty, wants to admit that I didn't read the book, but somebody on my staff read the book and prepared me.
Very good.
And I have incredible producers who prepare me for every interview, because the volume of interviews I'm doing it rules out the possibility of ever reading any of these books. But I get really excellent preparation documents.
That's fair. You wouldn't do anything else if you had to read all the books. So no problem.
And I'm a slow reader. Okay. But so it manifested physically for you. That makes sense for me, just to me, because, I've had so many of my psychological ailments manifest physically. But
it's like there's a mind-body connection or something. Who knew?
Or Ellen Langer would say it's mind-body unity. It's not even a connection. It's the same thing. But I want to pick up on something that's related to this, and also that it's a breadcrumb you dropped several paragraphs ago, where in your work at a center that specializes in anxiety and related disorders, you see your sense is that perfectionism is at the root of, and I believe you write about this in your book. It's at the root of, or at least linked to, obsessive compulsive disorder and eating disorders. Can you say a little bit more about this?
So perfectionism is not a disorder in and of itself. Like it's not diagnosable. It's more of a like a mindset or a trait, but it definitely lies at the heart of other diagnosable disorders like social anxiety or OCD, eating disorders, some kinds of treatment-resistant anxiety. Sometimes we will worry ourselves into a depression because of perfectionism. And the heart is that we have to perform as superbly as we can. And so in eating disorders, it's either on like body weight or shape, or on feeling in control when we eat. In social anxiety, it's that idea that there's a kind of a fatal flaw about us, and it will be revealed unless we work really hard to conceal it. We have to perform correctly socially and not make mistakes. So yeah, it's at the heart of a lot of what we do. And the number of clients I have who are struggling with perfectionism, if you line up 100 different people, you will see 100 different phenotypes of perfectionism. I work with a musician, a stay-at-home mom, an academic, a neuroscientist. Like there's just all sorts of varieties of people who are putting their performance, or who are making their performance a referendum on their character.
Performance a referendum on your character. I suspect many heads are nodding asynchronously as people consume this podcast. Where does this come from? Did we evolve for perfectionism, or is that a more modern development?
That's a great question. So, okay, it definitely comes from both within and from all around us, which I think is really interesting. So it has been shown to be genetic. So again, even though it's not diagnosable, like it definitely runs in families. And then speaking of families, it can be, conferred upon us from certainly any kind of family, but there are a number of sort of different styles of parenting that have been identified as making it more likely that will, come out perfectionistic. And that is if we are from a family that's perfectionistic itself, if we're from sort of a helicopter snowplow family where like caution and avoiding risk and mistakes is really important. If we're from a family that conferred a lot of contingent approval, where like love sort of got confused with pride, we got attention and positive regard when we accomplished things. And then fourth is if our family was sort of chaotic or dramatic, erratic, abusive, when that's where kids will often find safety and control through their performance. They can, if I can't control dad's drinking, at least I can control my grades. If I can't control, mom getting angry, I can be charismatic and be the most popular kid in school. So definitely there's some that comes from within, but it also comes from all around us, from the environment. And I would argue from 2025, because every human reacts to the situations we're put in. And so in a society that really is getting more demanding, competitive, performance-oriented due to, capitalism, competition, advertising, social media, you name it, all these messages are coming at us saying that we have to perform and consume and achieve to ever higher levels to be sufficient as a person. The researcher Andrew Hill says that perfectionistic climates turn us all into perfectionists. And I certainly agree.
Just to go back to evolution, would it be safe to say, and this is kind of just a surmise on my end after having listened to you, that there may be aspects of the human mind dating back to our origins that predispose us toward this trait, but it's been put on that latent potential has been put on steroids because of how culture has evolved?
Yeah, I'll surmise along with you for sure. So, okay, I think, so perfectionism, we usually think of it as a personal problem, but it's really an interpersonal problem, and we can talk more about that later. But my point is that perfectionism is interpersonally motivated. We do it to try to stay in others' good graces, to try not to get criticized or rejected or judged. And so, again, we're doing things as well as possible to try to, keep criticism and judgment at bay. And ultimately, it's because we want to connect with people. And so I think evolutionarily, probably, we learned to perform as well as possible because we thought that it kept the group together, kept it going, helped us get along harmoniously with everybody else. So that is my surmising.
It makes complete sense based on the very limited understanding I have of how we evolved. I mean, it all whittles down to love and safety.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I think the thing that we get confused when we double down on performance is that admiration and being impressive is different fundamentally from being accepted or belonging. Again, pride and love are different.
Yes. And the persona, which is actually probably a kind of form of armor that we create in order to get what we think is love, but is actually admiration, paradoxically and maddeningly gets us further away from what our underlying goal is.
We can end right now. That is absolutely, that is the message for sure. Yeah, no, definitely. Because the wall that we put up to try to protect ourselves from criticism and judgment acts as a wall that separates us from others. So we end up sort of being on this pedestal, but that means we're alone. Or we end, when we're singular, we're separate. And so it's ironic that we are doing this to try to gain, connection, love, belonging. And we end up with sort of an ersatz version of that, admiration, approval, compliments, but those are fundamentally different.
And I would just add to that, even if you're not getting the approval and you're still a perfectionist, because I think that describes many of us. I've been a failed perfectionist in many areas of my life. I'm not getting what I hoped for, and I'm kicking my own ass. The compulsive, reflexive, persistent self-evaluation removes you from the world, makes you less available, less authentic, and widens the gulf between you and what you actually want, whether you are singular or not in your achievements.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because we don't see the world as it is, right? We see the world as we are. And so if we're holding ourselves to personally demanding standards, we assume other people are holding us to those same standards. But, that's not what relationships and connecting, are about. Like, think about why your friends are your friends. Are you friends with your friends because they're good at things? Like, because they meet, personally demanding standards and metrics. Like, they're good at public speaking, or they always pick a good restaurant, or they're good at meditating. Probably not. Like, I'm guessing you're friends with your friends because of how you feel when you're together. You feel supported, understood, like you can be yourself, and that you don't have to perform at all. Like, that's that difference.
Real friends. Yeah.
Real friends. Right. Not connections or networks. Yeah, right. Exactly.
I don't know. I can't remember who said this, but it's something like people never remember what you say. They remember how you made them feel.
Yes. So the internet taught me that that's a Maya Angelou quote, but the internet is often wrong. So I could be wrong on that.
But she said so many brilliant things that the odds are pretty high.
That's true.
That it was her.
For sure.
All right. There's a term you use in the book, the many salads of perfectionism. Have you heard from Sweet Green's lawyers? And what do you mean by this?
Sure. So, okay, what I mean by a salad of perfectionism is that it's this tortured metaphor where there are a million different salads out there, like things as different as like tabbouleh and niçoise salad and jello salad are all salads, right? Okay, so there's all these different phenotypes. Likewise, as I alluded to before, you line up 100 different people with perfectionism and you have 100 different phenotypes. There's infinite ways of being perfectionistic. So, again, it could be about how much money you're bringing in. It could be about how healthy you ate today. It could be whether or not you yelled at your kids in so many different ways. Anyway, but the definition of a salad is that it's a variety of ingredients bonded by a common dressing. And so there are some commonalities in perfectionism that, like most people will be sort of allergic to mistakes. I say that we have sort of a peanut allergy to mistakes. So if you make a mistake, there's a big reaction. And we often procrastinate. We often compare ourselves to others. We do this thing called perfectionistic self-presentation, where we show the world what's going well and we sort of hide what's not going so well. Colloquially, this is called duck syndrome. It's where we look like we're gliding effortlessly across the surface, but really our little duck feet are working really, really hard underneath the surface. So there are a number of things that bind people with perfectionism, even as we all look very, very different.
That makes complete sense. I want to go back. We're going to, as promised, we are soon going to get to like how does one address the root causes here.
I'm here for you.
Of insufficiency, but just staying at a higher level for a second. There's a lingering question that I suspect some listeners are gnawing at in their minds, which is, isn't there a case for perfectionism and high standards sometimes? And I believe you even say in the book there's a difference between adaptive and maladaptive perfectionism.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, there is, okay, it's like some researchers would disagree with me, but others would totally agree with me that like there is such a thing as healthy perfectionism. And that's when we strive for excellence. We do good work for the work's sake. We set high standards. We care deeply. Like, please keep doing that. In fact, like the healthy heart of perfectionism is a personality trait called conscientiousness, which comes from the root word, conscious, like our sense of, or conscience, our sense of right and wrong. And essentially it's the conscientiousness is, according to research, including by the psychologist Dr. Angela Duckworth, who's better known for her work on grit, conscientiousness is the number one trait for a good life, both subjectively and objectively. So if you got to choose a personality, conscientiousness is the one to choose. And sometimes that does overgrow into perfectionism. We have self-control that sometimes gets a little out of control, but yes, it can absolutely be healthy and at its heart, means well and can do great things.
So how do we walk the line between adaptive and maladaptive perfectionism?
So we can't entirely separate out ourselves from our performance, nor would we want to, right? Like, of course, we're going to feel proud when we do something well. Of course, we're going to be bummed or disappointed when things go wrong. But I think we can try to separate them out a little bit and be able to gain some distance and perspective, there's a difference between our self-worth and our performance. So the technical name for this is over-evaluation. Our evaluation of our work gets overgrown and becomes an evaluation of ourselves. So one of the things we can do is we can try to shift from evaluation to information to make it about the work, not about you. So we could take the stance of like a sculptor eyeing a block of marble or like a chef tasting a dish. Like we inherently know that the sculptor and the sculpture are different, the chef and the dish are different. And all right, I'm gonna mix my metaphors. Our attention is like a spotlight, and we get to choose where to point it. So we can, if we point it at the work, like whatever it is we're trying to do, we generally feel better and perform better. If we point it at ourselves, we generally feel worse and perform worse. And so I'll tell you a story from the book to illustrate this. So I tell the story of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and his time at UCLA under the legendary basketball coach, John Wooden. And during his time there, or around that time, the UCLA basketball team was just a powerhouse and had 7 in a row national titles. It was incredible, all under Coach Wooden. And so 2 education researchers, doctors Roland Tharp and Ronald Gallimore, decided to sit in the stands for every single practice of the 74-75 season to see, like, what is the secret sauce? How does Coach Wooden do this? And what they discovered is that he very seldom praised or criticized his players, that instead he would focus on the work. He would tell them what to do and how to do it. So he wouldn't say things like, good job, or, no, like, you stink, you have to practice more. He would say, pass from the chest, take lots of shots where you might get them in games, pass the ball to someone short. He would give you information as opposed to evaluation. And that shift from yourself to the work seems subtle, but makes a big difference.
So do you never want to say to yourself, good job?
No. Again, there are degrees of this for sure. And again, we can certainly be proud of what we do, but we're trying to get some perspective and get some distance that we are not our work. We are not our performance, that those 2 things can be related, but not that if you picture a Venn diagram, we want it to not be completely overlapping, which is what I will often see when folks come into the clinic. So we work to try to crank them apart just a little bit. And that even honestly, okay, here, this is another quick story. I had a potential client email me and say, hey, I'd like to work on perfectionism. And I said, cool, come on in. And we set up an intake. And the day before, she emailed me again. And she said, I have given this some thought, and I want to wait until I have lots of time and can put lots of energy and effort into fighting this problem. And what I said to her, and what I would say to listeners who might be nodding, is that to your question, you don't have to separate out worth and performance or never say good job. Just like a 5% difference, a 10% difference, that's really all you need. It's not this complete cleaving of worth and performance. Yeah.
Well, you've brought us to the practical, which I've been promising for a while. And the book consists of 7 different shifts we can make to help us address what you're calling, and I'm sympathetic to this, to your argument, what you're calling the underlying root cause of perfectionism, which is a sense of not enoughness, insufficiency. So shift number 1 is from self-criticism to kindness. Can you, my goal, by the way, for the rest of the interview is to kind of just go through as many of these shifts as we can cover. The first one is from self-criticism to kindness. Can you I suspect we may have already covered some of this, but can you hold forth on that one?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, okay, so let me just normalize things also, that everybody criticizes themselves from time to time. It's like, so self-criticism is the core of humans' ability to self-regulate. And so a healthy dose of self-judgment helps us like evaluate our behavior, modify it to improve ourselves, like, get along more harmoniously with our fellow humans. Evolutionarily, we critique ourselves to better ourselves. So some self-criticism is going to happen, but perfectionistic self-criticism is particularly harsh and particularly personalistic. It's about us. And so, I have found that as an anxiety therapist, I have two levers I can pull. I can pull change or acceptance. And so we could change self-criticism, and we can, but I've gotten a lot more, a lot farther with folks by trying to change their relationship to self-criticism. So what I mean by that, actually, here, this is a good story. Okay. So, many years ago, I was on your show and I was there as a first-time author. This was the biggest show I had ever been on, like, to date. And I was quite anxious. And so we recorded, and you asked such good questions and were so kind. And along the way, I made a totally reasonable number of mistakes. Like, I think I lost my train of thought at one point. I think I stumbled over my words a couple times. At one point, I actually remember thinking that I had offended you. And so after recording, despite you and your producer and everyone just being so nice and so complimentary, like, that's all I could think about. All I could think about was like the errors. And so I was just kicking myself on the way out the door. And my poor editor, who had come with me, steered me into the nearest bar and bought me a gin and tonic, ostensibly to celebrate. But I think he knew, like, that my self-criticism had really started going. And so I have now, fast forward like 7 years, done this enough, like done, something with a microphone or put my work out into the world enough that I know this is just kind of what happens. That I will, again, do something with a microphone, and then my brain will just start to zero in on the mistakes or the details or the things that went wrong, and we'll focus on that. But rather than trying to like not think about that, or like, let me reframe this, which, absolutely can work, I have tried to change my relationship to the self-criticism and think, this is just how I'm wired. This is what happens when I do something involving a microphone. And it's just part of the script. Kind of like, I go to a restaurant, like the hostess seats me, like the waiter comes, I order, the food comes, I eat it, pay, I leave. Okay. That's just the script. When I do something, a podcast recording, like, part of the script is that I record, I leave, I think it stinks. I think about all the mistakes I made, and then usually it's fine. And if it's not fine, like, either I can learn from that, or sometimes things just don't go well, and that's okay. And and I know that other people have their own version of this. Like my partner, whenever he gives a PowerPoint presentation, comes home and thinks it sucks and will think of all the mistakes he made. And we've learned this is just how it goes. This is just part of the script. And so by taking the stance of kind of listening to my self-criticism like the music at a coffee shop, that has made all the difference. Like, it's there. My brain is still making those thoughts. I can hear it. But I don't have to sing along. I don't have to take my self-criticism seriously or literally. It can just happen, and I can change my relationship to it.
I'm really interested in this dialectic, change. I don't know if I'm using that word correctly, but change and acceptance. And the argument you just made for acceptance completely lands for me. And as you were talking, I was thinking about the work of both Kristen Neff and Ethan Kross, both of whom have been on the show. I'll put some links in the show notes. But they both talk a lot about rewiring your own inner chatter. So it would be less on the acceptance side, although they're both pro acceptance, but more, their emphasis is more on the change side, that you can learn, anybody can, without massive like meditation interventions or anything like that, learn how to just develop the habit of talking to yourself kindly. And it doesn't have to be cheesy. Well, it can be cheesy, but it doesn't have to be unrealistic affirmations, pretending that you're perfect or being in denial, et cetera, et cetera. It's more like the way a good coach talks to their his or her or their players. And so I'm just curious, what's your take on the, we've talked about acceptance, but what about on the change side here as it comes to the inner critic?
Man, you teed me up just right. That was great. Okay, so yeah, absolutely. No, I love Kristin Neff. And I appreciate it actually, her work actually helped me understand perfectionism, because she says that self-compassion consists of three things: of self-kindness, of non-judgmental mindfulness, and connection to the larger human experience. But the perfectionistic brain is reverse threaded for all three of those things. So instead of self-kindness, we're wired to be self-critical. Instead of non-judgmental mindfulness, we can be judgmental. We zero in on flaws. And instead of connecting to the larger human experience, we see our struggles or mistakes or shortcomings as things that set us apart, rather than as common experiences that connect us to others. And so that is not carved into a stone tablet. Like, we can absolutely change all of those things, but just our starting point is kind of, we're coming from an inside a hole, basically. And so I was taught, the Kristin Neff method, that self-compassion was talking to yourself like a good friend, or talking to yourself like a coach. But my perfectionistic brain thought that meant that I had to generate a steady stream of articulate and effective self-compassionate hype. And that was too high a bar. So in pulling the change lever, I learned, oh my gosh, Ellen, you don't have to make it that complicated, that it can be, one word. It can be easy, or like 2 words, you're okay, or, something way less, self-compassion presidential speech writing-esque. So, but in addition to words, again, pulling that change lever, I learned that self-compassion can also be actions. And for me, at least, that was a lot easier, because I feel like it is hard to control our thoughts, like, don't think about a cheeseburger floating above my head. It is hard to control our feelings. If you've ever been told, calm down, or just relax, or cheer up, you probably wanted to punch the person in the face. That probably, you can't just change your emotion, but you can. And when I say you, I mean everybody. We can control our actions. And so self-compassion can be giving ourselves, okay, let me back up. Self-compassion can be turning towards our pain and suffering and asking, what do I need? And so it could be something as simple as taking a few more minutes under the warm shower on a cold morning. It could be I did this yesterday. I made myself go to the gym, even though I didn't want to, because I just know from experience that it'll make me feel better. But it can also be giving ourselves permission not to do everything we expect of ourselves. It could be deciding to skip the gym because what we really need is an extra hour of sleep. So again, all in all, self-compassion can be words and can be actions, which was really helpful for me. And it's turning towards our pain and suffering and asking, what do I need, with care and understanding.
Chris Germer, Kristin Neff's longtime research partner and pal, said here on the show that the preeminent question of self-compassion is, what do I need right now? And so amen to everything you just said. Shift number 2. So just to reset, we're talking about perfectionism. Thesis is that what lies beneath perfectionism is a sense of insufficiency. And so, like, how do you start to feel like enough? Well, there are these 7 shifts that she's going to propose in the course of her book, which you should read. We talked about the first one, which is from self-criticism to kindness. Shift number 2 is coming home to your life. What do you mean by that?
So with the coming home to your life, essentially what I mean is that again, perfectionism drives us to focus on on performance, to focus on being good at things. And so I pose the question of, essentially, if let's change the yardstick. Rather than measuring ourselves by, did I do the thing? Let's switch over and ask a completely different question, which is, am I living the life I want to live? Am I being the person I want to be? And so that implies that takes us from a lower power position where, we have to do the thing, and our, every performance is a referendum on our character. So our worth is never a settled question, to being able to choose, and we'll get into this later, but based on our freely chosen values, what do I want to do? What is meaningful, important, purposeful, fun for me? And if I could choose how to live my life and what to do next, what would I do? And surprise, we can, within our context, we can do that. So that's essentially in a nutshell what I mean by coming home to your life.
So just trying to think this through as it would apply to me. So I could be obsessed with being a successful, and then that's a goalpost that always moves,
for sure,
writer and podcaster, or I could and that would be a label, or I could be more focused on hewing closely to my underlying values, which would be cultivating positive relationships in every aspect of my life. And the latter is confers much more agency.
Amazing. Yes. Yeah. It sounds like, yeah. And then what's under being the, quote unquote, successful podcaster and writer is that you're helping people, is that building a community, is that, serving others, those sound like values. And as long as those feel freely chosen and not like a new rule, then yeah, absolutely. Then you're running in the direction of values as opposed to trying to stick to some rule or some label.
Right. And freely chosen seems important also because depending on what your chromosomal structure or pigmentation is, society can impose upon you values that may not be your own.
In the book, yeah, I tried to make a distinction that, yeah, folks from, sexual, racial, gender minorities, there really can be there's another layer. Because again, yeah, all humans react to the situation we're put in. And so if we're put in a society or an institution or a workplace that overtly or covertly tells us, you don't belong here, you don't deserve to be here, then that resulting urge to prove ourselves, to earn our way into the group is no longer a personality trait, but an understandable reaction. And an example I give, so Dr. Gary Mitchell from Duke researches college prep programs designed to launch, high-achieving Black and brown kids into impressive career trajectories. And he finds that at some of these schools, the kids in the college prep programs may be subject to higher standards of behavior, of academics, than kids from, say, legacy or donor families. So yeah, perfectionism can be institutionalized even, and there can be higher expectations for certain folks. And so one solution there is representation. When everybody belongs, it lessens that external pull to prove that you belong. And so you can spend less of your bandwidth proving you belong and by doing excellent work. And instead you can just simply do your excellent work. And then another solution is community, which is what Dr. Mitchell calls this a thick sense of cohort. And that assures us that we're not alone. So yes. So there can be a very real pull to prove ourselves. And then, yeah, that is conferred by the environment for sure.
Shift number 3, and you nodded to this a little bit earlier, is from rules to flexibility. Say more.
Yeah. Okay. So we alluded to rules a little bit, okay, I got to be a successful, podcaster and writer, yeah, we all have rules, and especially like those of us with perfectionism, we want to know the rules so we can follow them. And like, ironically, if there are no rules, we set up personally demanding rules and then we follow those. So, think about like making up rules for healthy eating, or making up rules for like, I don't know, training for a 5K or something, like training or like studying for your chemistry exam. Like, it's not that rules are bad. It's when three different things happen that they start to get in our way. So one is that when our rules become rigid. So we apply them no matter the situation. So like we try to follow the diet even on Thanksgiving. Like, then we're getting ourselves into some questionable territory. Two, the rules are all or nothing. If we follow the rules acceptably, we're acceptable. If we mess up, then it renders us unacceptable. I ate a cookie, so like that ruins my entire healthy eating for the day, and I'm bad. And then three is when we start to impose our rules on other people. It can get in the way of our relationships. So, for example, I'm sure I have the right way to load the dishwasher, but if I try to impose that on my other family members, then, it's going to cause some commotion. So the dishwasher just always comes up. So that's the classic example. Anyway, okay. So the shift is trying to shift from following the rules, did I do the thing, to values, which we alluded to before. And I want to take just a minute to define values, because it's a word that gets thrown around a lot. So I'm going to give you the definition that so Mike Tuhig and Clarissa Ong, who wrote an excellent book called The Anxious Perfectionist, defined values as having four things, four qualities. And I think the fourth one is the most important. So one is value is continuous. So you're never done, living a value. So a value is different than a goal. It's like making $1 million is not a value. That's a goal. But like financial security or wealth or I don't know, whatever, that could be considered a value. You're never done. Values are intrinsically meaningful, meaning you'd care about it even if no one else knew. So like getting famous isn't a value, but like putting in the work and putting good work out into the world is. Values are under your control, meaning they're not contingent upon anyone else. So like being loved isn't a value, but being loving is. And the fourth one, again, this is the one I think is most important, and we already used these words, but they're freely chosen. Values are never coercive or obligatory. So you freely choose to follow them. And you're probably even likely to be willing to tolerate some discomfort or inconvenience to do so. So it's like the value of sustainability or like giving back might be why you're willing to give up your Saturday morning to go volunteer to pick up trash on the beach, rather than spending that same morning like relaxing at the beach. And in perfectionism, the thing that I feel like we need to watch out for is that oftentimes rules will sort of masquerade as values, or values will function as rules. And that sense of it being freely chosen is what differentiates them. So the example I always like to use is I had a client who said, through a combination of God and my mother, I was taught to be generous. But she said that meant that if somebody on the street asked her for $1 or a neighbor asked her to babysit, she had to do it. It was the very opposite of the spirit of generosity, because it was obligatory and coercive, like the sense of I have to. And so that's what I have clients and folks watch out for is, does this feel obligatory or does this feel freely chosen? If it's freely chosen, it's functioning as a value. And this is a very long answer, but when we stop, living by only rules and shift over to values, we might not even do anything particularly differently. So for instance, like I had a client who was very concerned about being a good friend. And she said, amongst other things, there are things she had to do if she was going to be a good friend. She has to remember her friend's birthday. She has to ask them detailed questions about their life. Like if they go for a walk together, she's going to surprise them with their favorite coffee order. So, none of these things are bad. They're lovely. Please keep doing them. But it's that sense of have to. It's that sense of coercion, like the duty, the obligation behind it that can make that friendship feel like a people-pleasing grind. And so this client, she tried to shift to a value of being supportive, being attentive. And then she was freely choosing to remember their birthday, ask them detailed questions about their life, maybe surprise them with their favorite coffee order. But the quality of the experience changed. It felt like a want rather than a should. And that made all the difference.
Let's just go back to the cookie for a second, because I think that's probably deeply resonant for a lot of people, and it describes me, and thankfully not anymore, although occasionally. But you were using the example of, I have these food rules, and I slipped up and ate a cookie, and the whole day's out the window, and I'm a bad boy. Smack me on the snout. If I'm understanding this heuristic of, moving from rules to flexibility, it's like, yeah, I can have cookies once in a while. My overarching goal is to be, or my value is to take care of my body, to be as healthy as I can, but not miserable. And so, yeah, sometimes some cookies, that's what's called for. Yeah. So my stating the spirit of this correctly?
100%. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think, okay, so are we getting into mistakes now?
Oh, sure. Let's do that.
Okay.
So that is shift number 4, which is mistakes. Shift number 4 is mistakes, from holding on to letting go.
So yeah, when we're over-identified with our performance, whether that's, healthy eating or, productivity, social behavior, et cetera, how, good parenting, whatever it is, there's no room for mistakes, because, then it reflects on us personally. So here I have a shout from the rooftops rant where, okay, so I think the conventional advice about perfectionism, which can work, but is like, okay, so the conventional advice is you have to lower your standards, or you have to stop when things are good enough. And that doesn't go over well with people with perfectionism, because again, if we're still working on separating out our worth from our performance, settling for subpar or mediocre performance means we're subpar or mediocre, and we're not going to do that. So I think semantics are important. So keep your high standards. The high standards are not the problem. Instead, what I try to focus on is to make some room for mistakes. That's different than lowering our standards. And so I've told the story before, but I think it bears repeating. So I was working with a pediatrician, and she had been a pediatrician for 25 years, long storied career. And she came in one week and was just beside herself because she had misdiagnosed a little girl who came in with what she thought was constipation, and it turned out to be appendicitis. And so, kind of a big mistake. And the little girl ended up later having to go to the emergency room, have emergency surgery. She was fine, but my client was just kicking herself, saying things like, I should retire early. Maybe I should get my head examined. Like, I'm a terrible doctor. Okay. So for her, I would argue that we actually don't want to lower her standards or like stop when things are good enough. She should keep the high standards of correctly diagnosing every kid who comes through the door. But there are going to be inevitable mistakes over a 25-year career, not because she's incapable, not because she's incompetent, but because she is human. And it's just going to happen. Mistakes is part of the package deal of being human. And so I like to try to ask people, appropriate to their situation, like, all right, over a 25-year career, like what percentage of misdiagnoses do you think is reasonable? Or, how many cookies do you think you're going to eat in a day? Or like how, what is a reasonable amount of mistakes or screw ups or escape hatches or whatnot? And it doesn't even matter what the answer is, as long as that answer is non-zero. Because that little bit of wiggle room is kind of all we need to allow ourselves, some of the inevitable screw ups that are part of the package deal of life.
I often tell my staff I expect excellence, and I expect mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Amazing.
Shift number 5, from procrastination to productivity.
Yes. Okay. So procrastination is, so people are often surprised that this is part of perfectionism, but I think it makes sense. And procrastination is not a time management problem. I think the research is starting to show us, and is starting to that it's starting to show up in popular writing as well. Procrastination is an emotion regulation problem. And then perfectionism puts everything on steroids, because like aversive tasks require quite a bit of self-regulation. Like you have to kind of focus or get your act together, or, regulate enough so you can do this thing you don't want to do. And self-regulation deteriorates under emotional distress. So if we're feeling distressed and overwhelmed because our standards are unrealistic, or we feel like we have to do the whole thing in one go, or we are not allowed to make mistakes, or we have to do this easily the first time, then that sort of overwhelms our self-regulation, and procrastination steps in as a coping mechanism. And it's a double whammy, because it allows us to both avoid the task that's making us feel bad and immediately replace it with something that makes us feel better. Whether that's, pandemic era procrastinating, or like going into a TikTok rabbit hole, or, not that I've ever done either of those things. And so what we can do is the classic of, break tasks down into steps so small you feel no resistance. And in perfectionism, we can make them ridiculously small. No one has to know how small our steps are. I worked with a gentleman who was trying to motivate himself to go to the gym, and his first step was peel a banana. And that was the first step to, then he would eat the banana that would fuel his workout. And then his next step was find car keys, which I found highly relatable. Anyway, the point is that the steps can be really, really small. And that's okay. No one has to know how small they are. And if you feel resistance, break it down even more. So that's one. And the sort of the less classic, newer technique that I found was quite helpful is to connect with your future self. That it's found that folks who procrastinate and folks with perfectionism relate to their future self in a brain scanner almost as if they're relating to a stranger. We think that our future self will feel like washing the dishes, or writing our literature paper, or working on that slide deck, when we know from experience that's not the case. But if we can just, it doesn't even matter if we picture our future self doing the task or not doing, if we can just kind of create a more realistic relationship with our future self, and not kick the can down the road to it, assuming it'll be motivated and happy to do all these tasks, then it's easier to get started now.
I love that. And we've done episodes. I'll drop a link in the show note. We did a whole episode about relating to your future self. In the interest of time, I'm going to move us along to the final 2 shifts.
You got it.
Shift number 6 of 7 is from comparison to contentment. My wife the other day pointed out, in a great moment of using my own teaching against me, that I was falling into comparing mind, because I joined a new workout group, and I'm definitely the least fit person in this group. So anyway, from comparison to contentment, say more about this, if you would.
We must be in the same workout or in similar workout groups, because I feel the same way every time I go to the gym. Anyway, okay. So I want to start out by saying that comparing ourselves is inevitable. So you're not doing anything wrong there. So Dr. Leon Festinger, who originated the theory of social comparison, essentially found that it's hardwired. I mean, we can't even tell if we're tall or short without comparing ourselves to others. So to try to stop comparing ourselves entirely is essentially fighting biology. Okay, but what perfectionism is doing is we're comparing ourselves to others to answer the question like, am I doing okay? Am I enough? But then we're outsourcing our worth to the people we're comparing ourselves to, and our self-esteem will rise and fall with each comparison. Okay, so what to do is, so social comparison is at its heart a lack of information, that we tend to compare on one metric. So, to your point, like fitness, or like something that's happening with a lot of young people, like number of social media followers or likes. And so I had a client who was comparing herself to her boss based on just age and title. So like, why am I not farther along by this point in my life? So what we do, we compare apples to apple pie, basically, and we always come out behind. And so what we can do is to try to broaden the comparison points until we're what I call comparing apples to tennis balls. So like with my client, again, she was comparing on age and job title. But then we tried to include, if she's trying to answer the question, am I good enough? We tried to like flood the zone with tons of different variables. So we included things she knew, like education, time at the company, and then a million things that she didn't have any access to, like work hours or partner support or mental health challenges, possible nepotism, and so the point is, if we're asking, am I good enough? The goal is to include so many comparison points, both in like quantity and variety, that the answer becomes, well, I can't determine that by comparing myself to this person. And so the whole thing breaks down. So anyway, the point is that we compare on like just very few things, and we stake our whole self-worth on it. And so what we try to do is to make it a little bit ridiculous and leave us with the conclusion of, well, only I can determine, if I'm sufficient. I can't outsource it to my view of this person.
I love it because it's like the antidote to comparison is more comparison.
Right, exactly.
All right, shift number 7.
Okay.
From control to authenticity.
Yeah, so there's a lot in these chapters under this shift. So this is dealing with emotional perfectionism, which can be internal or external. And essentially it boils down to needing to be appropriate, however we define that, in one's felt or demonstrated emotion. Oftentimes, people with perfectionism have learned that emotion is a response to the outside situation, as opposed to how we actually feel inside. That, we present as sad because the situation is sad, or we present as amused because the situation is supposed to be lighthearted. So I'll tell you a story about a client named Gus, who, well, we'll call him Gus. So he came in because he wanted to optimize his performance at work, and specifically wanted to work on public speaking. And so that already raised this flag for me for perfectionism. Anytime somebody says optimize, he wanted to be really, really good at public speaking and to come off as, not making any mistakes, be impressive, like leave everyone with their jaw hanging open. But what happened is that his perfectionistic self-presentation manifested as like over-preparing and over-practicing to the point that it came off as wooden. Before meetings where he would present, he would like stand at the podium, like silently rehearsing his slides, and he would ignore the people who came in. And then when he gave the presentation, he would like perform his slides. Like it didn't really matter who was in the room. And so what he was doing is to back up to some theory. Susan Fiske at Princeton says there are essentially 2 dimensions on which humans evaluate each other. There's competence and warmth. And competence is like how skilled, talented, capable is this person. Warmth is like how kind, caring, good-hearted is this person. And in perfectionism, we double down on competence. We want to give a good performance, but it turns out that warmth comes first and carries more weight in making a good impression on other people. That we need to determine if people are friendly, are on our side, and or our foe and working against us before we evaluate their competence and whether or not they're capable of carrying out those intentions. So, okay, now that was nerdy and heady. So what Gus was doing is he was doubling down on competence, but at the expense of warmth. So we tried to double down on warmth. Keep competence. We all want to be competence. We're not doing a 180 and flipping from competence to incompetence, but we're just going to add on some warmth. And so instead of like over preparing and over practicing, tried to roll him back to preparing and practicing, but not to the point where he came off as wooden. When instead of silently rehearsing his slides as people came in, he greeted them by name, said hello, how was your weekend? And then this was the most important, when he presented, he focused on sharing his knowledge and like the story he was trying to tell with the energy of, look at this cool rock I found, rather than trying to perform as like Gus, the impressive expert. And so to boil it all down, when Gus was using perfectionistic self-presentation, yeah, sure, he avoided mistakes, but he also missed out on connection with his colleagues and showing his colleagues that like he cared about them and trusted them. That when we show people a little bit of like what's under the rug, or allow them to see us before everything is perfectly polished and we have the correct highlighted answer at the end, when we say like, oh, here's a little bit of my mess, we're sending two messages. We're saying, I trust you, because I'm showing this to you before it's like perfectly polished. And so I trust you not to judge me or criticize me. And two, we are the same. We are equals. This is not some kind of like mentor-mentee relationship or teacher-student relationship. Like we're both human, we're both equal. And implicitly sending the message of I trust you and we are the same is really going to draw people closer to us and get us that to come back to the beginning, that connection and belonging that we're ultimately looking for.
There was a lot in what you said, but the one thing that really stood out to me was the rock. I'm gonna present as if I'm showing you a cool rock, and I'm guessing that Gus likes rocks, and that you, as a wise therapist, honed in on who he really is at his core, which is a dude who likes rocks. And if you can channel who you are at your core and bring that energy into whatever room you're occupying, people are going to like you, because we all like we like realness.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like it's the energy of like, hey, look at this cool thing, as opposed to like, I must present, this perfectly to you. And yeah, so to your point about authenticity, there's a technique that I really, really like because it seems so counterintuitive to your point about authenticity. And actually here our overall, like trying to increase our feeling of enoughness. I feel like so many of us will try to like hype ourselves up or psych ourselves up with, I got this, or, but before our client Gus could go onto his public speaking, maybe he would try to reassure himself. But what we can do instead is to affirm what we know to be true about ourselves, even if it has nothing to do with the situation at hand. So you can do this before or after. So like let's pretend Gus's presentation goes poorly. He might be tempted to reassure himself that he's actually smart, or he's actually talented, or to like think about presentations where it did go well, and that can, he'll try to make himself feel better that way. But that doesn't often work. And what we can do instead is try to focus on the things we know to be unquestionably true about ourselves, like, I think rocks are the coolest thing ever, or like reading books and making art make my world go round, or I was put on earth to help the less fortunate, or like I have wicked awesome style, or like whatever we genuinely hold dear. I'm a great dad, can shore up the story of ourself and like thicken our skin, which can buffer against like self-esteem threats. So I didn't make this up. This is the work of Doctors Jeffrey Cohen and David Sherman. And they find that the goal is not to flatter ourselves or to, like, again, reassure ourselves that we're actually smart and like most things go well, but to really maintain sort of an overarching narrative of the self's adequacy, which again creates that buffer against the inevitable mistakes and struggles and setbacks of life.
This has been enormously helpful. Dr. Ellen Hendriksen, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Great to talk to you again. Thank you so much for having me.